Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Exodus chapter 15, verse 19, through chapter 17, verse 7. For the horses of Pharaoh came with his chariots and his footmen into the sea, and the Lord brought back the waters of the sea on them. But the Israelites walked on dry land in the middle of the sea. Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a hand drum in her hand, and all the women went out after her with hand drums and with dances. Miriam sang in response to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea." Then Moses led Israel to journey away from the Red Sea. They went out to the desert of Shur, walked for 3 days into the desert, and found no water. Then they came to Marah, but they were not able to drink the waters of Marah because they were bitter. That is why its name was Marah. So the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What can we drink?" He cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When Moses threw it into the water became safe to drink. There the Lord made for them a binding ordinance, and there he tested them. He said, "If you will diligently obey the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, and pay attention to his commandments and keep all his statutes, then all the diseases that I brought on the Egyptians I will not bring on you, for I, the Lord, am your healer." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. When they journeyed from Elim, the entire company of Israelites came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after their exodus from the land of Egypt. The entire company of Israelites murmured against Moses and Aaron in the desert. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this desert to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people will go out and gather the amount for each day, so that I may test them. Will they walk in my law or not? On the 6th day they will prepare what they bring in, and it will be twice as much as they gather every other day." Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your murmurings against the Lord. As for us, what are we, that you should murmur against us?" Moses said, "You will know this when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to satisfy you, because the Lord has heard your murmurings, that you are murmuring against him. As for us, what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Tell the whole community of the Israelites, 'Come before the Lord, because he has heard your murmurings.'" As Aaron spoke to the whole community of the Israelites, and they looked toward the desert, there the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, "I have heard the murmurings of the Israelites. Tell them, during the evening you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be satisfied with bread, so that you may know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening the quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning a layer of dew was all around the camp. When the layer of dew had evaporated, there on the surface of the desert was a thin, flaky substance, thin like frost on the earth. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" because they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you for food. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each person is to gather from it what he can eat, an omer per person, according to the number of your people. Each one will pick it up for whoever lives in his tent." The Israelites did so, and they gathered, some more, some less. When they measured with an omer, the one who gathered much had nothing left over, and the one who gathered little lacked nothing. Each one had gathered what he could eat. Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some kept part of it until morning, and it was full of worms and began to stink. And Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it each morning, each person according to what he could eat, and when the sun got hot, it would melt. And on the 6th day they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers per person, and all the leaders of the community came and told Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a time of cessation from work, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Whatever you want to bake, bake today. Whatever you want to boil, boil today. Whatever is left put aside for yourselves to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until the morning, just as Moses had commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the area. 6 days you will gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather it, but they found nothing. So the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to obey my commandments and my instructions? See, because the Lord has given you the Sabbath, that is why he is giving you food for 2 days on the 6th day. Each of you stay where you are. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day. The house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed and was white, and it tasted like wafers with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it to be kept for generations to come, so that they may see the food I fed you in the desert when I brought you out from the land of Egypt." Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put in it an omer full of manna, and place it before the Lord to be kept for generations to come." Just as the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony for safekeeping. Now the Israelites ate manna 40 years, until they came to a land that was inhabited. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. The whole community of the Israelites traveled on their journey from the desert of Sin, according to the Lord's instruction, and they pitched camp in Rephidim. Now there was no water for the people to drink. So the people contended with Moses, and they said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you contend with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people were very thirsty there for water, and they murmured against Moses and said, "Why in the world did you bring us out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? A little more, and they will stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go over before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will be standing before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you will strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink." And Moses did so in plain view of the elders of Israel. He called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the contending of the Israelites, and because of their testing the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Yeah. So at the start, you had a lot of rejoicing in that they had just been enslaved from bondage in Egypt, from Pharaoh. They had just been saved through the Red Sea, that is, the waters had parted because the Lord had commanded Moses to take his staff and hold it above the Red Sea, and it parted. But Pharaoh and his company came through the sea, and the sea fell back on them. So you had all of the Israelites there worshiping and praising God after they came out from the Red Sea. There was this whole song that Moses had sang before the Lord. Miriam and her company were there, and were also singing before the Lord. And then you have instances like at the beginning of 17 here with "Give us water to drink." In 17:3, "Why in the world did you bring us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst?" And also, "16:3, the Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this desert to kill this whole assembly with hunger." The plan was never hidden from the Israelites. They knew that, Moses was very prominent in saying that the Lord says, "Let my people go, that he may serve me. Let Israel go, that he may serve me." And yeah, when Moses first came to the assembly, he said to them that, oh goodness, that it was the God of their fathers that was the one who was calling them out of the land of Egypt. But here you have them not only disregarding that fact, but also looking favorably back to their time of Egypt, for which they were calling out to God for the bitter bondage and slavery that they were experiencing. But here they characterize it positively: when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. Yeah. Which, it's not the last time, and I don't even think this is the first time, that they were grumbling and complaining against God. Yeah, but you also have God providing meat and manna to the children of Israel here. See what Guzik has to say. Yeah, I'm also reminded of Hebrews there, of the author saying that, well, quoting the Exodus and saying, I swore in my anger that they would not enter my rest. And that's because of how little faith they had in God, despite all of the miraculous working of God that he had done in their midst. Miriam the prophetess. We see that Miriam had some kind of prophetic gift. Later, she used her leadership position in an unwise and ungodly way to challenge the authority of Moses. But on this occasion, she led the women's choir. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. 3 days is not a very long time, but it is long enough to forget the great victory and power of God. Now Israel faced a long trip through difficult and dry desert. 3 days is the maximum time the human body can go without water in the desert. The Egyptians found enough water, and even too much of it, for they were drowned in the sea, but the well-beloved Israelites had no water at all. So is it with the wicked man. He often has enough of wealth, and too much of it, till he is drowned in sensual delights, and perishes in floods of prosperity. From Spurgeon. They could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. It must have seemed like a cruel joke. After 3 waterless days, they finally came upon water, and found that water undrinkable. So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. By following God's direction, Moses made the waters drinkable, and Israel found water in the wilderness. I think if I had been there, I should have suggested that Moses should use that rod of his. Did he not divide the Red Sea with it? Why not just put his rod into the water and stir it up and make it sweet? Oh yes, you know we are always for running to old methods, but God is a sovereign, and he will work as he pleases. From Spurgeon. And there he tested them. God tested Israel by giving them a command to obey. When God tells us what to do, he really gives us a test. Our obedience determines if we pass the test or not. It had yet to be demonstrated by testing whether the children of Israel were a worshipping people who occasionally murmured, or if they were a murmuring people who occasionally worshipped. Their true nature would be revealed in times of testing, and it would be revealed as the latter. I will put none of the diseases on which on you, which I have brought on the Egyptians." This was God's promise to an obedient Israel. In many ways, their physical health was directly connected to their obedience. Dr. Macmillan, in his book None of These Diseases, noted that many of God's laws to Israel had a direct impact on hygiene and health. Practices such as circumcision, quarantine, washing in running water, and eating kosher made a real medical difference in keeping Israel free from disease. Beyond the direct medical implications, obedience also means we are at peace with God and free from a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety in life. This has an obvious benefit to the health of any person. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. After the time of testing, God had a time of refreshing for the people of Israel. He knew exactly what they needed, and he knew when to test them and when to rest them. Elim was wonderful, a place of provision with 12 wells and 70 palm trees. Yet there was no new revelation of God at Elim, as there was at Marah, where God revealed himself as Jehovah Rapha. On the 15th day of the second month. This marked 1 month after leaving Egypt, since they left on the 15th of the previous month. They came out from Elim, an oasis of rest and comfort. They headed toward Sinai, a place to meet with God and receive his law. In between Elim and Sinai was the wilderness of Sin. In the original text, the name Wilderness of Sin has nothing to do with sin, and could just as easily be translated Wilderness of Zin. Yet as the story unfolds, we see that this wilderness had a lot to do with sin. They complained because they did not have enough food. The supplies they carried with them from Egypt began to run out, and they had to be sustained in the wilderness. It would seem that starvation was more anticipated than experienced. In other words, they did not live through weeks and weeks of famine, nor did they saw their family and friends die of malnutrition, or even have to kill all their livestock for food. Instead, they started to feel hungry and anticipated starvation. "You have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly." This is another common practice among those who complain. They insisted that Moses and Aaron had bad or evil intentions. Of course, Moses and Aaron had no interest in killing the people of Israel, and this was a horrible accusation to make. Yet a complaining heart often finds it easy to accuse the person they complain against of the worst motives. "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you." This was a remarkable promise. Bread doesn't normally rain from heaven, yet God promised that he would provide for Israel in this unexpected way. Yeah, it's also interesting to me, the economy of heaven, in that you have this bread that rains from heaven that works in a different way than people are normally used to. That is, that they had to gather it each day because it would spoil, except for the sixth day, which they would gather twice as much and could keep it to the next day. It was food that worked in such a way that demonstrated the economy of heaven. "At evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt." One would think that with the experience of the plagues, Passover, and the deliverance at the Red Sea, Israel would already know that the Lord had brought them out of Egypt. Yet experiences, even great experiences, don't change the heart as much as we often think. Yeah. So it was that quails came up at evening and covered the camp. In a miraculous way, God provided Israel with plenty of meat in the wilderness. This was a significant display of the mercy of God. When Israel complained, God could have answered with judgment or discipline, and he gave them meat instead. Manna, a small round substance as fine as frost on the ground. Exodus 16:31 describes the bread from heaven as like coriander seed, about the size of a sesame seed, and sweet like honey. Numbers 11:7 says it was the color of bdellium, a pearl-like color. It was either baked or boiled. Numbers 11:8 says they ground it on millstones or beat it in the mortar, cooked it in pans, and made cakes out of it, and its taste was like the taste of pastry prepared with oil. A small round substance. It is difficult to precisely identify what this substance was. Some researchers identify it with what the Arabs today call man, which is formed when a tiny insect punctures the bark of the tamarisk tree, drinks the sap, and exudes a clear liquid that solidifies as a sugary globule when it hits the ground. When the sun comes up, it melts quickly and disappears. That would have to be a bunch of bugs, though. The modern-day man never appears in great quantities. It doesn't last year-round, and it is confined to a small geographic region. The purpose for giving the bread from heaven was not only to provide for the material needs of Israel, but also to teach them eternal lessons of dependence on God. This is demonstrated in passages like Deuteronomy 8:3. So he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. When God puts us in a place of need, he wants to do more than meet the need. He wants to teach eternal lessons. Feeding Israel through the bread from heaven was an example of God's way of cooperating with man. Israel could not bring the manna, and God would not gather it for them. Each had to do their part. Animals are often taught through their food. When they could not be reached in any other way, they have been instructed by their hunger, and by their thirst, and by their feeding. From Spurgeon. Ultimately, the Bible says that in him we move and breathe and have our being. That is, Jesus is the one that is sustaining our bodies. And in a very physical way, the Israelites found that out in the desert, that without the protective hand of God, they wouldn't survive. But it was only through God's sustaining of them that they could live. An omer per person. An omer could be as much as a gallon, especially in the later history of Israel, but at this early point in Israel's history, it may have meant only a cupful. It is an imprecise measure. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. This was the first time God spoke to Israel about the Sabbath. God essentially forced them to honor the Sabbath by not providing any bread from heaven on the Sabbath. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. As important as it was for God to provide this bread from heaven, it was also important for God to stop providing it. It was essential that Israel be put again in the position to receive God's more normal provision through hard work, which in itself is a blessing of God. I think it's also important that as we read through Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, that we remember that God is constantly providing for them. this manna from heaven, up until the time where they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Because to me it makes the grumbling and complaining that much worse. Because here you have them being sustained by the very power of God, visibly in the form of this manna, and being guided by God visibly in the form of the cloud and the pillar of fire, and still they disbelieve. Also, this manna, this God feeding his people phenomena, is an image also that Jesus adopts in the Gospels, where he feeds the 5,000 and 7,000 and however many thousands that he keeps feeding. Let's see. Oh, yeah. And they come to another place where the water is bitter. Or where there's no water. They journeyed out from the wilderness of sin, but there was no water for the people to drink. Israel did exactly what God commanded, following the pillar of cloud and fire, yet there was no water to drink. They were in the will of God, but in a difficult time. It is possible to be completely in the will of God, yet also in a season of great problems. Therefore the people contended with Moses. The people of Israel had a real problem. There was no water for the people to drink. This was not an imaginary problem, and the people were right to be concerned. Yet when the people then contended with Moses, they did not respond with spiritual thinking or actions. Yeah, they should have cried out to the Lord for water. When we have a problem, it is much easier to blame someone than to think through the problem carefully and spiritually. In this situation, Israel could have thought, we are in a desert, and it's not surprising there isn't much water here. We need to look to God to meet this need. Instead, they blamed Moses and did nothing to help the problem. Take in your hand the rod which you struck the river. God directed Moses to get out before the people, to bring other leaders with him, and to use what God had used before. This gave confidence to Moses because he saw God use that same rod to do great miracles before. Moses couldn't pick up the rod without remembering the power of God. The confidence he received by picking up the rod was confidence in God, not in himself. Behold, I will stand before you there. One of the great themes of this journey from Egypt to Canaan was that God was with them. He was with them each step of the way, and here again, he would show his presence to Moses and to Israel. You shall strike the rock, and water will come out. Moses was commanded in the presence of the Lord to strike the rock with his rod, and water would gush forth to satisfy the thirst of God's people. So he called the name of the place. Moses did what God told him to do, and water came from the rock. This was a great miracle of God's provision and a rebuke to unbelieving and rebellious Israel. Massah and Meribah. God remembered the way Israel tested him at Massah and Meribah, recalling it in several passages. Deuteronomy 6:16, you shall not tempt the Lord your God as you tempted him in Massah. Deuteronomy 9:22, at Massah you provoked the Lord to wrath. Deuteronomy 33:8, your Holy One whom you tested at Massah, and with whom you contended at the waters of Meribah. They tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? God dramatically said, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, saying that he was and would be present with Israel. Yet they still wondered, is the Lord among us or not? This attitude among the Israelites was their great sin. In this time of difficulty, the children of Israel, directly or indirectly, doubted the loving presence and care of God among them. Under the stress of an immediate lack, these people doubted the one fact of which they had overwhelming evidence. Yeah. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.